Schools. Voi sa ba, wai, nus kini go ta kini giging gol, nuam skarap mo gatsum. Thanks everybody for joining our call today, and I'm calling in from the traditional unceded territories of the Alienation. And if we can ask everybody to do your own acknowledgement since we're across the country, and just put it in the chat, that would be much appreciated, just to let everybody know where everybody's calling in from. So look forward to today and yeah, and the rest of the semester. So I will turn it back now to Matthew.
Thank you, Patrick. Adrian, are you next up?
All right, I don't think so, no.
Next slide. It's me, I think, who goes next.
Okay, sorry.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Stevens. It's so nice to have such a great crowd of people here on a Saturday when we're not sure you really want to be here, but we're really excited to be launching the Superstudio. I'm going to give some context for the next couple of minutes about the housing crisis in Canada, just to give some background before we dive into all the things we're going to do with our time together today. So it probably comes as no surprise to anyone on this call that the state of housing in Canada, the system that we have for housing in Canada, is not in good shape. You can see it in the news all the time with stories about the housing crisis as it's framed, a kind of national shame, the conditions that we see for First Nations, Indigenous peoples across Canada are facing on reserve land and off reserve land in urban city centers and in rural places. This is something that we see all the time. Next slide. So this housing affordability is tracked also in the state of the kind of ratios between the cost of a house and income levels across Canada. It continues to get worse over time, and we've seen this crisis deepen and deepen. People are starting to speak up, they're starting to protest, they're starting to get out on the streets in March and ask for something to change. So we're seeing real political movement shaping up around this issue. Next. So again, in the major city centers, the costs of these detached homes, but condominiums, apartments, all of these costs are rising, rising, rising. Next. And it exists for those who are trying to rent or buy a home. It exists in home prices in city centers. Next slide. And it exists in the counts for people who are living on the streets, living homeless in our cities. So the number of people living homeless continues to be a serious issue across Canada. Next. We see a few considerations for how to understand the roots of this, one of those being financialization. So we see a continued shift as housing becomes more and more wrapped into the system of financialization that really says that we have a set of conditions where buying a house or renting a house is contributing to the increased importance of that value of the home, of land property and the value of land over the whole of the economy. So we see that in whether the new condo towers that are being built are increasingly iconic, but also at the same time increasingly standardized. We see that in the way that single-family homes are being marketed as investment opportunities as opposed to being considered first and foremost as a place for someone to live and to make a home. Next. And we also see, at the kind of across groups of people across Canada who are marginalized for many different reasons, that's really hitting hard for a lot of different people here. And we see it in water advisories and conditions on reserves. We see it in SROs in the downtowns. It really affects a lot of Canadians. Next slide. Oh, wait, sorry, go back one. So we see financialization as an important root of what's wrong with the system in Canada. And we also see colonization as another really important root to what the set of property relations are, how they came to exist, and how they impact this housing market that we see today for everyone in Canada, whether you're able to afford a home or whether you're not able to afford one, that this is a system that really affects everyone. And now I'll pass it over to David to talk about AHA.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. We thought it would be useful for some of you that may not be too familiar with AHA, especially some of the students, to sort of give you a bit of a background behind it. And so really this started with some informal conversations between a few of us, and then quickly the kind of organizing committee was formed. So Matthew Souls, who you've met, had been writing and thinking about architecture and capitalism for a while. Sarah had been publishing on the role of real estate in various areas. Tiana had been publishing and thinking much about the Soviet Union, and she writes on a number of things as a historian. Adrian and I have been doing work on questions of property and what that meant to our land relations as part of building a nation state. And Patrick Stewart, in the bottom left image, has been a leader for decades in Indigenous housing and was part of our issue of Scapegoat. My own firm in the middle and the bottom had been doing some work in housing as well. And Adrian's been working even hands-on, so not just writing about these, but also thinking about what it means for design work and practice. And so we formed the group here to submit for the Canada Council for the Arts to represent Canada at the Biennale. Next slide. And when we were selected, immediately, this was the title of our campaign. We wanted to frame it not as much as an exhibit, but as a campaign. And we worked very closely with Chris Lee and Ali Kadir and others, very quickly became part of our team to figure out, the identity of this group. And the name, which I think Adrian's going to expand on more, that we came up with as Architects Against Housing Alienation. Next slide. So there's a photo of us at the opening, and you can see a poster designed. We posterized Venice, as well as had a poster campaign in parts of Canada. And there you can see some of our collaborators on the left, and I just wanted to give a shout out to them because they were very important members of our team from day one. So Chris, Ali, Vince, and Mary Esperance. Next slide. I think at the core of this, again, Adrian will expand on this, but as you probably got from your syllabi, that really what we're interested in is this question of alienation and alienation alienation of existential homelessness and private accumulation causing what alienation is, and how that impacts our relations with nature, ecological, relations with our kin, our social relationships, and also our creativity as a psychological. So, this question of what is it to be at home in a state of well-being are those categories we've got on the far right side. Next slide. So we formed 10 teams across the country geographically and kind of worked our networks to kind of establish these teams. Next slide. They were formed basically under this idea that architects independently in housing are quite limited in what we can do. But together, when we're working with activists and advocates, architects can add tremendous value to some of these questions of the things Sarah highlighted. Next. And we'll get into this, but there was a demand that was the task of each team, and then to design a project that would support that demand. Next slide. And this just gives you a scan. I won't go through every team, but you can see the teams broken down into their sub-team members, as well as their key demand in the middle. And again, this was formed as a kind of collective campaign. So one campaign, one manifesto, but with many different arms to it. Next one.
Okay, and I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the Not for Sale campaign and what we did in Venice, and then describe very quickly what we've done after the Venice Biennale. So AHA came together, launched this Not for Sale campaign. This is the Canada Pavilion in Venice, we occupied the pavilion for the duration of the 2023 Biennale as our heart quarters, not a headquarters, a heart quarters for the Not for Sale campaign. And we saw what we did as itself an act of protest, but also an act of organization and learning and communication around questions of alienation and helping to improve housing in Canada. So we wrapped the pavilion with images of encampments in Vancouver. This was a project that a component of the campaign that we did in collaboration with encampment communities. This is the opening ceremony. This is one of our collaborators, Alex Wilson, speaking truth to power at that opening. We saw the opening itself as an act of protest, that the world's media would be looking at these images and it would be broadcast around the world. And it worked in many ways. It sort of ricocheted through Canada's media and also elsewhere in the world. But inside the pavilion, it was this working heart quarters. Here are some of the students that came and participated in the effort, working in the pavilion. And then you can see arrayed around various forms of campaign material, campaign banners, campaign reading materials, and the architectural drawings and slogans and designs that make up these demands. It was a live space that would change and flux with visitors coming and gathering for different types of events with the students sometimes or sometimes on their own. This happens to be a sticker making workshop to produce campaign material. So the Biennale ended in November 2023, and AHA has been very active since then in a whole variety of ways. So we see the campaign continuing and evolving. We've done things like housing financialization walking tours in Vancouver. We have participated in other exhibitions and gatherings. So we were invited to exhibit at the Milan Design Week in 2024. And we use this as an opportunity to create dialogues between Milanese housing experts and activists and Canadian housing experts and activists that we might learn from each other. And it was a very exciting opportunity for these conversations on very important topics to unfold. We've also had other exhibitions in Vancouver, in Canada. This is one at the Kamloops Art Gallery in British Columbia. And we've done things like postering campaigns to just get our ideas out into different spaces. So you see on the right a series of posters that we designed, and on the left one of them deployed. All the while, we also have tried to keep a pretty active social media presence as a component of our communication efforts, and have spent actually a lot of work designing and creating quite content-rich posts that are all archived on our Instagram page. So if you haven't checked those out, we encourage you to follow us and look at what we have there. So that's just a snippet of some of the things we did in Venice and what we're continuing to do. And we see this Superstudio as working in tandem with all of these kind of ongoing parallel efforts.
So why are we doing a Superstudio, and what is a Superstudio? One of the essential elements of the project in Venice was that Matthew taught 15 UBC students in the summer of 2023, and I taught 15 Waterloo students in the fall of 2023 in the pavilion. And so the idea of pedagogy as being a part of this project was there from the very beginning. And David and I have done a couple of studios at Waterloo where we look at this idea as well. The idea of housing alienation as a theme, and some of the structures that we started with this exhibition within a studio environment. And so we thought it's a pretty interesting way to think about the problem of housing in Canada. And we had already networked people in different places across the nation. And so we started to think that maybe we could develop something where, next slide, studios across the country could address a common problem. And we think the idea of alienation is a pretty powerful concept to think about in relation to housing. Alienation itself means not feeling at home, and housing is a home. But it means a lot of different things. It could mean overcrowding, displacement, dispossession, homelessness, harassment, disrepair. But what's important about the concept of alienation is that it's not only about a separation from home, but it's also about the idea that things can be easily exchanged. And so we really see one of the central problems about housing in Canada is the way in which it is exchangeable, the way in which houses and homes have become something which are assetized and commodified and financialized. And it's this process of turning home into these different financial instruments that is causing alienation. So that's one of the key themes, and that's why we thought it would be good for us to read this essay by Madden and Marcuse about residential alienation. Next slide. So we also thought there were certain structures within the exhibition that we did that are interesting, and one of those was the idea of demands. The idea that somehow things need to change in the housing system. And we need to think as architects, not only how we work within the housing system to make better housing, but more importantly, how do we change the housing system? That's the question. And how, because what the housing system as it exists is not producing affordable, non-alienated housing. Next slide. So we took inspiration from the Green New Deal Superstudio, which was something that was developed in the United States by a set of different partners. Next slide. These included the Landscape Architecture Foundation, the Center for Resilient Cities and Landscapes, the Weizmann School of Design, and the McHarg Center for Urbanism and Ecology, the American Society of Landscape Architects, and the Council of Educators in Landscape Architecture. So it was quite a big coalition. And next slide. It involved a lot of different universities around the world, most in the United States, but in different countries as well. And next slide. It involved a lot of student projects. So up to 670 projects were produced through the Green New Deal Studio. But it was really an attempt to kind of take this idea of the Green New Deal that was circulating in the United States as a way to stimulate the economy through producing climate resilient landscape architecture. And we thought this is a great model, and we should try to mobilize schools across Canada to think about housing alienation. And so this is not as big a project, but it's similar, and we're trying to learn from this initiative. Next slide. So Ali Kadir, who's a professor at Ontario College of Art and Design University, has produced this website as a first basic infrastructure for the studio. And you can refer to it to understand what's happening right now. But we're going to produce a new infrastructure once we have work, an infrastructure that everybody who's here in this room can upload and add content to. Next slide. So we developed a format for the Superstudio, which is very simple. There are some very broad and basic shared characteristics and tactics across all the studios that are participating. But of course, most of the content is studio specific. So many of these studios have even been running for many years outside of the scope of this Superstudio, but in some way they resonate with the themes within it and have agreed to somehow collaborate and share within this larger Superstudio. So the shared characteristics are simple. All individual studio courses share a broad common theme. We're going to come together once or twice over the term, and we're going to share resources and design knowledge. The studios will have unique building sites, types of housing, conceptual parameters, and they're unique in intellectual and pedagogical aims. And part of the idea is that we want to find different approaches. So there's nothing standardized about the Superstudio. Next slide. So we developed together in a series of meetings over the summer, a set of shared principles. And the first one is Indigenous solidarity. Whether these studios focus directly on Indigenous housing issues in direct collaboration with Indigenous partners, or whether they focus exclusively on urban housing issues for a diverse population, all studios acknowledge Indigenous land relations and the effects of colonization within the studio. So, I mean, I think within Architects Against Housing Alienation, we really believe that a lot of the pathologies of the contemporary city are generated because of the violence of settler colonialism and the dispossession of Indigenous land. And so these are issues that no matter what the content of the studio is, we have to address and think about. The second principle is housing decommodification. The housing problem in Canada is the result of the rapid increase in the cost of land caused by the assetization of land and housing. These studios will explore decommodified approaches. The third idea is holistic quality. The housing problem is often addressed quantitatively as either a question of supply or price point, but housing alienation is a qualitative issue. Housing needs to be better designed to connect inhabitants to their surrounding natural ecology, their community of family and friends, and their sense of creative agency. And finally, we think that it's important that studios are collaborative. Housing is part of a complex system with many participants, not just architects. Architects have a deep understanding of the qualitative dimensions of home, but they don't have the training to navigate the policy landscape, diverse lived experience, and social struggles that shape the housing problem. So they need to address these issues with collaborators with other forms of expertise and within an ethical framework. Next slide. We also thought there should be a set of shared structures. So these are very simple. We think it's important to collaborate with non-architectural partners. We have not developed a clear set of shared protocols, but I think we've talked about it a lot. And we do believe that it's important that when we're collaborating with partners, that we develop these equitable protocols for collaboration. We would like each studio to develop one or more demand to end housing alienation. These could be based on the demands that Architects Against Housing Alienation's manifesto produced, but of course it can be something completely different, which resonates with your studio themes. And that's one of the things we're going to deal with in the workshop today. And we're going to have common online workshops and reviews with paired schools, and we've developed a website exhibition of studio work. Next slide. So finally, we have this webinar kickoff. We're going to have an end of term webinar and celebration. We had talked about the 6th, but I think December 13th we're coming around to. This is still maybe a bit tentative, the end of term. And the midterm groupings are things that are going to be developed on a studio by studio basis. So I think that gives a sense of the idea of the Superstudio. And we're going to jump into presentations by each of the participating fall studios.
Great. I guess we have the privilege of starting off with Carleton University. So thank you very much for including us in this. We'll start here. At Carleton, the Housing Studio is also our comprehensive studio. It's offered in the first semester of our final year of the undergraduate program. And given the comprehensive mandate, we take students through a whole gamut of issues from master planning and program setting to the detailed design of building envelopes and structural systems. Students work in pairs in the studio, which also includes a 3-hour weekly lecture component where we address a range of issues, both social, political, and technical. We begin the semester with a series of introductory exercises, including a precedent analysis and a unit design exercise. We then introduce students to their sites through the zoning analysis and site design exercises. And at this point, students visit their sites, meet with their development partners, which depending on the year will range from large private sector developers like Minto to not-for-profit developers like Ottawa Community Housing and Gignal Housing, a local Indigenous housing provider. In all cases, our sites are programmed for a combination of market and subsidized housing. The image you see on this slide is a proposal for a redevelopment of a site owned by Ottawa Community Housing. And about 2/3 of this site is meant to be subsidized housing managed by OCH. And 1/3 of the site actually pays for the rest of it. And that's market housing that may or may not be built by OCH or other partners. So sites ranging from about 3 to 10 hectares are large enough to accommodate multiple buildings and housing types. Sites are located in or close to the urban core, and their development generally falls under the rubric of intensification. When they include existing buildings, students are challenged to decide if and how to integrate them. While the larger program can include social infrastructure like daycares and community centers, these are not the focus of the studio. Next slide. Phase 1 of the design process involves site design and master planning. Students set targets for the number of units and unit types based on the intended demographics. Students then begin to organize the site, locating buildings, pushing roads into and through the site, and identifying how spaces in and around buildings are used. Frequently, up to 20% of each site has to be set aside for parkland designation, and students must integrate these parks into the overall plan. Next slide. In phase 2, every student chooses one building from their master plan to develop at a building scale. During this phase, however, the pairs continue to work together to refine the overall master plan and develop exterior spaces, notably the courtyards, plazas, and plazas associated with each of these buildings. Emphasis in this phase is placed on the overall building organization, bay systems, and the design of individual units on which strict constraints are placed in deference to affordability. In most cases, students are required to integrate underground parking, which poses challenges in locating circulation cores and adds a further level of complexity to the undertaking. Next slide. In the final phase, students choose 1.5 bays of each of their buildings to model at the detail scale. In so doing, they focus on the design of the building envelope and the structural systems. Programs often include permanent supportive housing, which lends itself to volumetric prefabrication. And many students opt to explore mass timber or integrate CLT into light wood frame construction. Next slide. Housing affordability is a key consideration of the studio, and this cuts across all sectors of housing, from deeply subsidized housing like permanent supportive housing through higher rent, below market rate housing, all the way into market housing. And as you're probably all aware, even for-profit home builders are struggling to produce anything that's affordable to anyone except those in the upper income quintile. This, in turn, is affecting supply at all levels. Sorry, I said one page, and now you're hearing me turn my page. Next slide. This project included a combination of permanent supportive housing, this project we're looking at on this slide, student housing, family-friendly below market rate housing, and market units with a community health hub on the ground floor. The permanent supportive housing and the student housing portions were comprised of prefabricated units, while the balance were site-built. And as you can see from the images on the left, the courtyards and outdoor rooms around which the complex was organized figured significantly in the design. Next slide. This site at which we've been looking, which was recently purchased by the city of Ottawa, with whom we worked on the studio, included a monastery that dated to the 1950s. While most students opted to tear it down, it was in a very awkward location on the site. This student converted it into a permanent supportive housing. By removing and replacing a wing of the building, he was able to provide an important gateway into the site while preserving the monumental entrance into the existing chapel, which he re-envisioned as a community facility. So thanks for allowing me to present this work. I hope it provides a sense of the scope and issues that we engage in Carleton's Housing Studio.
Hi, my name is Karen Kuby. I have the pleasure of teaching architecture and the right to housing, slightly different from some of the other studios that you'll see today, because this is a thesis studio for Masters of Architecture students in their final year. So that means it's a year-long class, and it means that students have a lot of latitude in terms of how they respond to the content of the studio. And one more thing I'll say is that we're taking extremely seriously the 4 shared principles. So what I'm showing you today is what we're overlaying on top of that. Next slide. Housing is a human right. Next slide. The right to housing is not only a legal and economic issue. So as you may know, the right to housing has been codified in international law since 1948 and has been law in Canada pretty recently since 2019. So this is not just a slogan, it's codified through 7 aspects that you see listed here. And a basic argument of the studio is that this legal framework can also be read as an architectural one, and that we can only fully realize, what's needed by residents if we explore the architectural implications of things like accessibility and cultural adequacy. Next. So the right to housing is architectural, and we will be, expanding on, this is not just, my idea. This is work that's happening as we speak. Some of the examples on the screen are just a few of the amazing projects around the world that we can look to for inspiration. Next. And I see this as an issue of spatial justice. This is a term coined by Ed Soja in his book On the Right, meaning basically how social justice manifests in the built environment. Next, please. So we have 2 basic questions that aren't basic at all that we'll be exploring through our projects. What does the right to housing mean in practice, and how can architects or architecture contribute? Next. So just a bit about what I'm bringing to the studio as its professor. I've been working in housing for a long time. Some of these ideas extend from a book I put out a few years ago, Housing as Intervention Architecture Towards Social Equity. Also some other roles listed on that slide. Next, please. And drawing from research that I'm doing parallel to this, that involves some excellent student research assistants doing a series of programs on architecture and the right to housing, so far in Mexico City, Toronto, Buenos Aires, and Sao Paulo, and soon in New York and Los Angeles. Next. These will be published in Untapped. Next. And drawing, I said Toronto was one of them. This was an amazing program. You might spy one of the members of AHA in one of these pictures, but this is bringing together, just like, the idea of collaboration, it's bringing together people working on housing from different points of view. And specifically in the public lecture there, you see a former UN Special Rapporteur on the right to housing, Leilani Farha, in conversation with Paul Karakusevich, to my mind, one of the best social housing architects in the world, who's doing research and not research, yes, research and a building in Toronto. Next, please. And the research side of this will be collected in a website, Architecture and Housing Justice Lab. So the link is there and the QR code will take you there. Next, please. So this is the second time I've had the pleasure. I swear the formatting was excellent. This is the second time I've had the pleasure of running this studio, but now, as I said, it'll be different because we're working with also the amazing 4 shared principles. So I wanted to share just some student examples from last year. We had Julia Bully, where students are looking at aspects of the right to housing, and like I'm saying, asking, how would these be made spatial? What would they mean in practice? So briefly, Julia looking at the idea of cultural adequacy, in this case for the Filipino community in Toronto, in an area called Little Manila, thinking about how traditional forms of housing in the Philippines might be hybridized within Canadian vernacular and Canadian context. Jennifer looking at the important idea of location and responding to the reality of her family and other families of immigrants who ended up having to move over and over again to find spaces that would accommodate intergenerational living. So adapting a home to make it work for that. And then looking at accessibility, which is defined in the human rights framework very broadly. Owen put together an amazing project for a co-care lodge that would house not only older residents, but also caretakers and their families. Next. Okay, so thanks so much. It's a year-long thesis. We're gonna have a good time, and I'm honored to be a part of this.
Oh, I wish I could have taken that course when I was in school. Hi everyone. I'm Robert. I'm not teaching studio. This is a seminar course, but otherwise, certainly related to the projects that are being done around the country here. This course is at Toronto Metropolitan. It's called The Architecture of Urban Housing, and I kind of title this course "Everything is Housing." And the intention here really is to understand the implications of housing across as many domains as we can. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. So on week one, which was the other day, we kind of went through as a class and took a look at all different types of a series of images and got into a long discussion about what constitutes. We said what is this? Is this housing and is this urban housing? And really got to kind of understand from a very broad spectrum of types of structures and things over different periods of time, the similarities and differences between um, what we've considered housing to be historically and where things are at right now. We looked at some other things as well, like, is it tent housing from here? How far can we really kind of take that does that make a sleeping bag housing? And we'll dive into these things in far greater detail throughout the course. Next slide, please. And we spoke a little bit as well about the nature of housing kind of shifting over time and like so much architecture, beyond having a site, being able to change things and the temporality of housing, kind of where we decide what is and isn't the separation between kind of us and the space around us. Next slide, please. With all that in mind, I'm looking to build to basically take students over the course of the semester through 4 different crises. So we're looking at, the housing crisis, which everyone on this call knows quite well. Land's expensive, materials are expensive, housing availability is low, commodification, private investment means that unless there are major financial returns, oftentimes building at the scale that we need to address the demand that we need or that we have is often is deemed challenging. Um, Conversely, we also are operating in a climate crisis. We have to majorly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years to avoid the 1.5-degree atmospheric warming limit set in the Paris Climate Agreement from some years ago. And the building sector worldwide accounts for 40% of greenhouse gas emissions of the world. And so, ultimately these are wildly opposing things. We have to build more housing and we have to build housing while somehow polluting less than we otherwise would be doing. We then also have a homelessness crisis. So this is a little bit different again because there's other things kind of operating into this. There's a toxic opioid crisis, arguably outdated models of shelter design and the ways in which these things help or don't help folks kind of move on from a current situation. And then we also have a crisis of connection, which we've spoken about so far in this conversation. Individuals, specifically more recent generations, feeling increasingly alienated from one another, uh, an increasingly isolated kind of separation of our work and our lives, losing our historical connection to the land, and kind of how that permeates throughout life. So these are our 4 crises through which we're going to look at housing over the semester. Next slide, please. And with that, there are several big questions. There are many large questions that we're working on as a group. But how has housing? Well, we're focusing specifically on Toronto for this course. A few case studies elsewhere, but broadly we're situated where I am here. How has housing here changed over time? Why do we keep building luxury condos? Why does it take so long to build housing? Why does housing pollute the environment so much? Why are more people becoming homeless in Toronto than getting housed? And ultimately, what are kind of the up and coming ways that the folks are looking to tackle some of these situations and these challenges? Next slide, please. A brief overview of how our semester is going to be kind of structured. It's basically in 2 halves. The first is how we got here. The second half is where we might go from here. And so we took a look at, house noun, different ideas of what a house is, has been, and can be this past week. We're moving into the financialization of housing next week, followed by planning and how planning starts to impact housing design. Taking a look at the carbon emissions of housing and how we can kind of measure the embodied and operating carbon of a building. Circularity, material reuse and deconstruction and adaptive reuse, how we can use more of what's already here and not having to build so much new. And building a continuum of housing, specifically looking at the homelessness crisis and different groups around Canada who are kind of looking at alternative forms of that. And then we start to take a look at how we reconsider our approach, or reconsider kind of the currently um, societally decided upon approaches to uh, land and deciding what's built where, how to divide up the things that are built, how to build those things, how to understand that folks who have maybe worked in the past on these sorts of things have had great intentions, and maybe sometimes those intentions have gone well, and other times perhaps not the way that they intended. And we'll start to kind of take a little bit of a look at that. Um, and if you go to the next, I think it's the next slide. I mean, this was just to say we're operating throughout the city of Toronto and kind of across basically within the boundaries here for the time being. But if you go to the following slide, um, we're going to be working every week. We're starting out with a series of weekly discussion questions, and so this is going to be for any of the students in my class who are on this call. You're getting an early glimpse of what it is you're going to be talking about as a class throughout the term. But all different types of things. Should existing neighborhoods of single-family homes be replaced with larger buildings? Why or why not? How large is too large? Why? Should new shelters be built in Toronto? What if they're near residential neighborhoods, near schools? Where should these be built? Um, Buildings account for 40% of greenhouse gas emissions. Should we build less housing because of housing's environmental impact? Large things to kind of get the class thinking, and as a group, folks are looking to kind of develop their takes on these questions over time. And next, I think final slide is the assignments throughout the semester. Again, this isn't a studio, but we're starting with a kind of an introduction where folks are looking at their personal houses and kind of doing a little bit of a dive into, why they think the current place they're living in may have been built, what factors kind of the thesis was of the person or the group who was building that housing at the time and designing that housing at the time. And then we're going to be working towards coming up with a zine, a graphic essay at the end of the semester on a topic of the student's choice related to the subjects that we talked about in the course. And so that's going to be exhibited at the TMU Architecture School on November 25th. And that's me so far. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. So I'm teaching Option Studio at the University of Waterloo. It's called Architectures of Relation, Infilling Affordable Housing in the Kensington Market Community Land Trust. Next slide. So it's obviously influenced very heavily by this work that I've been doing for a number of years with Architects Against Housing Alienation, and it's focused on the idea of alienation. Next slide. And as David's already said, we see alienation as a qualitative problem. So we think of it in many ways. We think about it in terms of the alienability of housing, its assetization, commodification, and financialization as the source of alienation. But we see it qualitatively as a disconnection from the ecological world that surrounds us, from the social community we inhabit, and from our own ability to control and affect the environment around us creatively. So these three forms of disconnection can be addressed through architecture. Next slide. I think, is it, okay, is this the next slide? Yeah. Yes, thanks. So about 25 years ago, I wrote an article called Possible Strategies for a Relational Architecture. And in it, I was just thinking about how architecture is not a thing, but it's a space in which things happen. And I'm revisiting that because I think relationality is a way to overcome alienation. So we talk a lot about connection. Connection is a way to overcome alienation, but relations are ways of overcoming alienation. And I'm in this work, I think I'm also inspired by David Fortin, who I've been collaborating with a lot, and his work, his recent work on critical relationalism from an Indigenous perspective. So looking at the importance of relations in an Indigenous world, relations to the natural environment, to culture, and to community. Next slide. So the subtitle of the studio is Infilling, and this came about through my first meetings with the partner group that we're going to be working with, the Kensington Market Community Land Trust, and their research committee had already isolated the idea that they wanted to think about infill housing. And for a long time, I've been interested in the way in which in Toronto, there's a rich history of infill housing as a mode of urban design. And specifically in the work of Diamond and Myers, who evolved into firms like Diamond Schmidt and KPMB. In the 1970s, they were really experimenting in interesting ways with working with existing fabrics and how to insert housing into existing fabrics. Next slide. And I think this tradition continues with firms like SVN, John Van Nostrand's work, takes the concept of infill from the urban and brings it into architecture. Can architecture itself be infilled and transformed? So this is these small images here are of a condominium proposal in Hamilton that SVN and John Van Nostrand did, in which units can be adapted within the building through an infill strategy. Next slide. And we're inspired by Madden and Marcuse's book In Defense of Housing, but back in the 1980s, Peter Marcuse wrote about infill housing as well in this preface to a book about infill housing in New York City. And here he says, infill housing is the opposite of slum clearance and displacement. It represents the integration of buildings and their residents into existing fabrics, not their separation and exclusion. Infill housing is a slogan of resistance and progress. So I think we're inspired by this to think about how infill can be a strategy of city building. Next slide. Within the Architects Against Housing Alienation project, I also participated in a project called We Demand a Gentrification Tax, which involved the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust, LGA, and a number of partners with LGA, and an artist group called Gentrification Tax Action that I've been a part of for a number of years. And here, the collaboration with Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust was very inspiring. And there's a real synergy between the idea of a gentrification tax that would take money that's being extracted from a community and reinvest it back in the community, and a land trust, which is about securing value within a community over a long period of time. So within the studio, we're going to work with a land trust. Next slide. This is just the website of the Canadian Network of Community Land Trusts. And their number one principle is housing is a right, not a commodity. So the land trust is a really important vehicle for decommodifying housing. Next slide. And we're going to work with the Kensington Market Community Land Trust, which is a relatively new land trust, which has already acquired a number of properties. They currently have 3 properties and are co-developing a 4th property in Kensington Market. And so it's a very exciting new land trust that's growing quickly and works in a very important neighborhood in the city, which is low rise, has been an immigrant reception area, is an affordable living space, but also an affordable commercial space in the city and a very dynamic fabric. So next slide. So we're going to look at a number of different sites for infill, some of which are parking lots, schools, but also laneways, and we're going to build on the history of infill. Next slide. So you can see on the left-hand side, urban infill in Kensington, where there are already many houses and housing buildings, multi-unit housing buildings that have been built in the mid-block. So there's already a really rich tradition of urban infill historically within Kensington. But there's also an architectural form of infill in Kensington in which the single-family houses have built awnings first and then additions that bring the building from the house back through the front yard out to the street. So I think there's a rich tradition of both urban and architectural infill in Kensington that can inspire the design work of the students. Thanks very much.
Hey, thanks, Adrian. I just gonna set up my screen here. Okay, so hello everyone. Bonjour, Anine. I'm really grateful to be part of this important collaboration this year. Thank you to all of you at the AHA team for bringing us together. My name is Amina Lawler. I use she, her pronouns. I am mixed Vietnamese, Irish, and Red River Métis, and today I'm tuning in from Swagmuck, also known as Sudbury, Ontario, and that's on the territory of the Tikmikshing First Nation and also within the bounds of the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850. I'm an assistant professor at the Laurentian University MacEwan School of Architecture, and I'll be teaching a master's level studio this semester called Storied Lands. I want to start with a few questions that ground this studio. Next slide, please. How do we, as architects, reconcile our practice within a settler colonial context violently inscribed onto Indigenous lands? How do we confront our complicity in Indigenous erasure and honor the treaties and kinship networks that underlie our presence on this ground? Amid an escalating climate crisis and acknowledging architecture as a land-based practice, how do we mend our relationships with the land, water, plants, and animals? Considering the profound dispossession of land experienced by Indigenous peoples, how do we engage in land back, support Indigenous sovereignty, and counter the alienation from land experienced within settler colonial frameworks? Next. While not focused on the design and construction of housing specifically, the studio looks at the aspect of housing alienation that involves our disconnection from the lands we inhabit. Next. The studio will be centered on gathering and sharing stories connected to land and place through land-based and community-engaged research, spatial storytelling, and placekeeping design exercises, contributing to the creation of what I've been calling a kind of decolonial atlas or storied land bundle of Swagamuck, Sudbury. Working with local elders, knowledge carriers, and community members, we will be exploring what it means to respect, honor, and live, work, play, and design in reciprocity with the land, treaties, and local First Nations in Swagamuck. Together, we will creatively document and represent these lands and the stories they carry. As tools of placemaking and placekeeping, we will also imagine ways in which architectural design interventions can carry these stories and support land back. I also want to mention here that we will also be collaborating with Patrick Stewart and likely Christelle Clark in the work this term, and I'm really excited about that. Next. I want to first emphasize the importance of working with community in this work. This semester, we will be working with both First Nations and Indigenous community members local to Swagamuck, as well as those in a Paskwayak Cree Nation. In Swagamuck, with pending approval from the Research Ethics Board here at Laurentian, we will be having conversations or interviews with a number of local knowledge keepers, elders, and community members to gather stories connected to land here, as well as seek direction in ways that our studio and the MacEwan School of Architecture more broadly can support the desires and needs of the community. Through connections and collaborative work with Dr. Alex Wilson, who was also involved in the AHA project As part of the studio, we will be taking a field trip to Opaskwayak Cree Nation, or OCN, in northern Manitoba to learn from a mapping project that Alex and the community have been working on there for many years, as well as supporting design work connected to the development of an Indigenous land-based education institute. This is a photograph from last year's field trip to OCN. I taught the studio last year as well, where students learned to butcher moose meat as well as prepare a meal. Next. This is a photo of our hosts and elders that we were lucky to learn from and share a meal with last year. And we'll take the lessons we learned from our field trip in OCN back to our work in Swagmuck. Next. Part of the studio will also involve practicing ways of building relationship with the land very directly. Students are asked to develop a practice of visiting with the land. So that means kind of going outside and spending time on the land and documenting close observations of our more than human relations. Next. We will also practice various methods of creatively documenting and building intimacy with the land. Next. These practices feed into explorations of mapping and how the practice of mapping plays a role in our conceptions of land. You might be familiar with this image. It's a screenshot from the Native Lands Project that has worked to map out Indigenous territories across the globe. While mapping was a critical tool in the process of settler colonization, land dispossession, and commodification, and ultimately alienation, mapping can also be used as a tool to counter these injustices and advocate for repossession, sovereignty, and reconnection. Next. As part of the studio, we will be looking at accessible methods of collaborative mapping and storytelling. Last year, students compiled a Google My Maps of research and findings of stories connected to place in Swagamuck, focusing on Indigenous histories and decolonial perspectives that destabilize the dominant settler colonial narratives connected to Swagamuck. Next. Next. Building on our research and observations and conversations with community, we will then be exploring creative methods of mapping and storytelling, as well as developing speculative architectural placekeeping proposals. These are artworks and artifacts that students created last year that engage various stories connected to Swagamuck. Next, next, next. Thank you. Merci.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sean Bailey. I just want to say thanks for the team for putting all this work. It's really amazing, and I feel real honored to be here right now. University of Manitoba. I'm Métis Nation of Ontario. I'm Red River Métis. I'm also cross-disciplined in engineering. The Indigenous scholar is kind of a tricky title, and I've been working the last 7 years trying to figure out what that means. This studio, I ran an ED4 studio last year, so that's our undergrad final year studio. We worked with Spence Neighborhood Association. So this is sort of a take on this studio. Last year's Trickster-themed inquiry into Indigenous homemaking and housing futures, where projects explored how storytelling and Indigenous ways of knowing could shape design. This year, we continue with the same community partners, but shift our focus a little bit from a narrative explorations to questions of making, fabrication, and materials as sites of culture and ecological transformation. Next slide, please. So David Pye says, design proposes, workmanship disposes. Quality isn't in the drawings, it's what emerges through the making. He uses the example of a kringle in a sail. The stitched holes aren't perfect circles, but they're strong, neat, and exactly what the sail needs. Their roughness doesn't reduce the work, it gives it beauty rooted in purpose and tradition. Pye calls this workmanship of risk, where outcomes rely on judgment, care, and skill. It's relational, as opposed to workmanship of certainty, where everything is predetermined and uniform. For housing, this means meaning isn't found in rigid efficiency, but in the marks of making traces of culture, care, and connection, relational. Next slide, please. Fabricating otherwise asks, what if housing carried this kind of beauty, not in perfection, but in how it was made? So the Spence Neighborhood Association is a resident-led organization working to revitalize their community through housing, green spaces, economic development, and support of youth and families. They serve a 25-block inner city area in Winnipeg with many Indigenous and immigrant residents and an older housing stock. Partnering with Spence, our studio will design with and for community. Next slide, please. In Winnipeg's inner city, systemic barriers show up in vacant lots, boarded homes, and community struggle, racism, poverty, and lack of safe housing, creating instability, especially for Indigenous families moving to the city. Our partners are key advocates for Indigenous-led housing, and their 2020 report, From House to Home, highlights the urgent need for culturally aligned housing and services. Within this context, our studio will work on 2 projects: a transient housing that offers more than a shelter, and a 24-hour emergency refuge for vulnerable youth. This studio is split into 2 terms. It's our comprehensive year. The first term is research and our comprehensive program report, and the second year is development of the design. Next slide, please. We'll be visiting Material Cultures in London, England, a non-for-profit design research collective focused on bio-based low-carbon construction. They treat architecture as part of a larger land in ecological systems, and our assignments will go to reflect this, showing how fabrication can carry cultural and ecological values. Next slide, please. We're also collaborating with Cornerstone Timber Frame. It's a local outfit here in Steinbach, a community about an hour just outside of Winnipeg. They will introduce students to full process of timber work, from forest to design, fabrication, and assembly, through lectures, tours, and hands-on collaboration with their team. They've also recently got into mass timber. Next slide, please. This one's a video. I don't know. Yeah, okay. We'll be visiting, while we're in England, we'll be visiting Architecture Association's Hook Park in Dorset. So that's a 350-acre woodland campus that is both a working forest and a laboratory. Students and researchers there use the forest to source of materials, combining digital fabrication with traditional craft, and test architecture at full scale. The core idea is that architecture cannot be separated from its material origins. Every building carries a story of the land it comes from. Projects at Hook are as much about stewardship, craft, and culture as they are about technical performance, guiding by a long-term forestry strategy that links construction to care and care for the land. This perspective leads us to ask, can fabrication become a site of resurgence? How might building and reciprocal and reparative? And what stories do our materials carry? And what stories do we want to tell? And that's the end. Thank you.
Great, thanks everyone. All of the courses are super inspiring, and it's an honor to be part of this collaborative. So thank you for inviting us. My name is Veronica Madonna. I'm an associate professor at Athabasca University, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our studio theme, which is called Community-Centric Housing for Rural and Regional Canada. And I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about some of the key reasons for putting this theme together, and then the studio itself. Next, please. So many of you may have heard that reports are suggesting that by 2030, we'll need nearly 6 million new affordable and accessible homes. But at current building rates, we're only achieving about 1/3 of that. In other words, the gap is widening, and most vulnerable, especially in rural areas, are the hardest hit. Next, please. So rural communities are often overlooked. Almost a quarter of rural residents, many of whom are Indigenous, cannot access affordable quality housing, and that's nearly double the national average. The rural context brings unique challenges, distance, infrastructure gaps, and cultural considerations that all shape how we need to design and deliver housing. Next, please. So another pressing point is aging, and nearly 1.5 million rural Canadians are over the age of 65. And this number is growing fast and faster than in cities. So options for aging that have moderate needs are limited. Too many fall through the cracks and between staying at home and moving into long-term care. So this creates an urgent demand for housing solutions that support aging in place. Next, please. So on top of housing and the housing challenges, climate change adds an additional layer. So Canada's north is warming at 3 times faster than the global rate. Communities already dealing with wildfire, flooding, and extreme weather events. This impacts are driving up repair, insurance costs, and they directly threaten the safety and health of inhabitants of these communities. So housing strategies must be climate appropriate, they must be resilient, and they must be regenerative. Next, please. So our guiding statement for the studios are: without access to regenerative strategies, culturally rooted design frameworks, and climate appropriate building solutions, rural and regional communities risk being excluded from Canada's housing and climate transition. Next, please. So our studio is actually bringing together 3 levels of students, all focusing on a level of housing. So our students in ADST 306 are looking at immediate housing through emergency shelters. Our ADST 326 students are looking at multi-generational family homes that will implement unique strategies like Barry John's backfill housing. And our advanced studio will be looking at collective multi-unit community living. And our students are working together in a single studio. So we'll have about 8 students together working collectively. And together, these projects will form a continuum from immediate shelter to long-term community-based housing models. Next, please. So our design studio statement is: how can rural and regional communities implement regenerative, low embodied carbon practices using wood technologies and forest-based biomaterials to support sustainable housing and community development? Next. Our site for the work is in collaboration with the township of Athabasca. Athabasca is about 2 hours north of Edmonton, and it presents many of the similar challenges. It has it's a resource-based economy. It has dispersed population and has strong community ties. Next, please. So our design theme will emphasize a regenerative framework and culturally appropriateness, rural and regional material responses. We're also going to be looking specifically at bioregional materials and what is available in communities. And we're going to look at how advanced constructions such as prefabrication and advanced engineering material can actually help deliver housing needs to rural communities, all within a community-oriented living. Next, please. And this is being tied directly into the project is being funded by Natural Resources Canada and GC. Holistic living strategies for low and middle carbon rural regional Canada. Next, please. And through this work, we're going to be developing a number of open data educational modules, toolkits, and low carbon information aspects through case studies and prototype design frameworks, as well as a data bank. And it's all going to be shared within a shared platform and website for the research. Great, thank you. That was the last slide.
Okay, so my name is Mauricio Soto Rubio. I'm an associate professor of architecture here at the University of Calgary. I was very lucky in a way to be able to participate in this initiative. I just happened to email Karen Kibbe about her book, and she said, "Oh, you're teaching about housing, by the way, you should look into this." So that same day I was able to get on board. So thank you, Karen, for the tip. At the University of Calgary, I mean, I've been here for a few years already. Before I taught at the California College of the Arts in San Francisco, and before there, I taught at the University of Stuttgart in Germany. Here I teach a whole bunch of courses, mainly in building science, structures. I'm the director of the Building Construction Innovation Group. But I also teach studios, and basically all my studios consistently for the last 10 years have been about housing, taking students to Tijuana to build houses with the non-for-profit Esperanza de Mexico that have a very interesting funding system. And I have collaborated with many indigenous communities here in Alberta. Anyway, so this studio is a second year undergraduate studio from students from our recent Bachelor of Design in City Innovation. So these are not architecture students yet. They might actually go into architecture or urban planning or landscape architecture or perhaps something else. But they have proven to be extremely resourceful and creative, young students. What's interesting is also that I am also offering the same exact studio to the last masters in architecture. So for students in the last semester of our masters in architecture program. So this will be the senior research studio in architecture. So it will be interesting to actually kind of have in the fall this studio, and then in the winter semester the same studio again with our graduating class. Okay, so this presentation is relatively short and is basically part of what I presented to the students a couple days ago. So I wanted to essentially, can we go to the next slide, please? I started, the conversation with this contrast, right? So on the left, we have this 19th century painting by Paul Kane, showing the Canadian prairies, buffalo, the vast ecosystems that one defined, the area around Calgary. And on the right is the contemporary suburban sprawl of Canada. So essentially, in just over a century, we transformed a living ecosystem into a spread of houses that extend basically from horizon to horizon, further and further into the prairie. So, and this, of course, is the dominant housing model in Canada today. It's isolating, it's energy inefficient, and it's carving up land that once sustained a diverse life. So the question that I ask the students is, okay, so what is all this effort, all of this transformation of the land, what has actually given us in terms of quality of life? Can we, next slide, please? And I don't want to spend too much time here, but of course, the paradox is obvious, despite this massive transformation, decades of suburban expansion, highways, subdivisions, construction, we're still in a huge housing crisis. And I don't want to give you too many data, but of course the data of the city of Calgary is very similar, reflects what we discussed before at a national level. We essentially consumed the land, but we haven't solved the housing problem. We transformed our natural ecosystems, or the natural ecosystems of the indigenous communities, and stolen from, and we still are not able to create homes that are affordable, adaptive, resilient, culturally appropriate, and in tune with the land. So next slide. So this is basically, what I'm asking the students. So I said the message is clear. We cannot simply build our way out of this mess by repeating the same housing model. So the studio essentially asked the question, what kind of housing can help us live differently, more sustainably, more collectively, and more resiliently? In an era of climate change, as we already saw, what if housing wasn't necessarily static, just a commodity, just a means of rich people getting richer? But what if maybe evolved with people, with society, What if it was able to adapt to climate and foster a more collective life between human beings? Next slide. So that's what I'm calling, the porous dwelling. It's a dwelling that is open, adaptive, resilient, mediating between what's inside, what's outside, challenging what's private and what's collective, negotiating between human and ecological. So it's more than a metaphor, it's a framework for kind of rethinking what housing can mean, right? So I came up with this for, let's say, the DNA of the studio, which says that, it begins with adaptability, adaptive housing, saying that housing should grow, shrink, transform, maybe with people's lives. Think of a dwelling that can be expanded or contracted or so on. So it must be also resilient, responding to climate challenges, with ecological intelligence. We have massive wildfires around the country. So how do we deal with that? What kind of passive strategies we can mediate between heat and cold, work with the land rather than against it. It should be evolving, not a fixed product, but a process of change, right? Homes should be able to adapt, maybe across, generations, hopefully 7 generations, rather than just being frozen in time. And of course, dwelling needs to be a collective enterprise. It needs to create opportunities for shared resources, cooperation, and community life. Housing is just not obviously just about shelter, but about the relationships that makes possible between people. So I told the students, okay, so these are more or less the principles that will guide us as we move through the, through the studio. Again, second year on the grad, not a lot of experience in terms of design, architectural, projects. So the first week, next slide, please, is going to be a research phase. So it's a 3 weeks research phase in teams of 2. Students will essentially, each student will look into a precedent, and they will also look into one manifesto. I gave them a list of possibilities, and they will range from indigenous traditions to participatory models, incremental housing, ecological retrofits in in other parts of the world, and so on. So, and then they will put together a little document that I called an atlas of ideas, an atlas of models. They will be put together and published just locally within the studio. Next. Then the next phase is it's called My House. So after the research phase, we'll dive into the design of what I call My House. Now, this is not about designing another conventional single-family home, but it's about experimental with the very idea of dwelling, right? We'll start small at the scale of a single household, but the questions are the same, right? So how can dwelling adapt and evolve? How do we respond to climate? What are the thresholds between inside, outside, private, collective? What new possibilities of living can we imagine? And then next slide. Then we'll scale that up. Phase 3, students will take those initial ideas and basically explode them into a larger project that includes, let's say, 6 to 10 units connected by shared infrastructures, spaces and resources that go beyond individual home. And they might be anything, of course, communal kitchens, preschools, courtyards, gardens, anything that that foster interaction. Here's where the ecological and cultural stakes, should become clear. That will take place on December 5th, just in time for our final review on the 6th or the week after, if that's the case. Next slide. So what I tell the students is, of course, that, the Porous Dwelling Studio is essentially about developing agency. It's not just about producing drawings of houses for a grade, but about learning to design, to think and design differently across scales, from one dwelling to a small community. And it's all about developing tools for adaptability, resilience, and collective life. And of course, it's more important than that. It's about contributing to a larger movement. That's why we're here. So I wanted to end, with this call of action. The studio demands housing that evolves with people, adapts to climate, and fosters collective life. That's what we mean by porous dwelling, right? So a housing model that is adaptive, resilient, and in tune with the land. That's it. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Inge Roker. I'm a professor, associate professor at Sala at UBC. And before I start, I want to say I'm German Canadian. Came 20 years ago to Canada, and I now call Vancouver Chinatown my community and my home. And of course, that is situated on the ancestral, unceded land of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam land. And I want to start with that because it really affected me in my journey. When I was at school, where you are now, like Small is Beautiful was my lecture. And I was really interested from the beginning in housing otherwise. But I started teaching in Germany and learned a lot about tectonics. I was in Karlsruhe, very close to Stuttgart. And then I came to Canada. And what I knew about Canada, that their big picture is this multicultural society. And I arrived here, and the more I looked at it, I go, how can that be? Like the housing is so singular. There's the single house, there's the tower, and the way it's done and the way you get it, there's no room for anything else. And where I came from was exactly the opposite. It was the missing middle, it was this part. And so from the beginning of my career, this duality was in my head. I also had the pleasure to practice in Germany the whole time and practice in Canada. So now to the studio. I'm super excited to be here and share with my students what I learned over the years, and how home otherwise is looking at what I call, or what we call in Europe, SOA, architecture, self-organized architecture. So next slide, please. So we are really focusing on collective participation of housing delivery, housing development. It can be repertoire practices or an extension, as I just said, that we do not have any variety of housing, which I think partly leads to our problem. And we're looking very closely at intentional communities. So through this lens, we will look at what makes good neighborhoods, what fosters community, and how do we achieve livability and adaptability, which affordability, of course, is part of it. Next one, please. So I'm not going to say much here. So as part of my UBC teaching, I'm teaching a second year master class, which is an urban design studio. And I'm combining it with the agenda of the Superstudio here. And I think it works very well together. So next one, please. So as a site and community, we are working with the South Falls Creek, with the Falls Creek South neighborhood in Vancouver, which is really interesting because it's city-owned land and hosts a lot of co-housing. And the issue is that it's coming of age and the leases are running out. And as such, the city has now run studies on how we can put more housing in this neighborhood. So our collaboration, our clients, is the Replan, which is the neighborhood organization of the neighborhood, to work with the city to create a new plan for the neighborhood. So for the students, it will be amazing that they actually get firsthand work with the community. And the way we do it is when the clients or the Replan group comes in, tells their dreams and aspirations, what they see. The students are asked to develop an ecosystem which is more than just the housing. It is kind of how it connects and how it will fit and how it maybe brings new energy or connects the neighborhood. Next one, please. So I thought I just give a quick shot how we are structured, because maybe some other studios see a way of where they can connect with us. So the first 2 weeks, we're doing analysis of the greater site. In parallel, where they do the on-site in Vancouver site analysis, the students are assigned projects, self-organized housing projects from around the world, to kind of get acquainted and see how people are doing this. And interesting, also see how probably the layouts and the units itself are very different compared to a commodified housing. So then the following 2 weeks, we are having the client coming in, they're telling their dreams and aspirations, and the students develop an ecosystem, what that could be. And then the following 3 weeks, the students, they pause for a moment on their ideas, and we're focusing on material investigation. And I've chosen 3 interesting wood hybrid systems, which I invited 3 architects coming in and showing and how that works. And when you see cost model, first time ever, I do this in a studio. I had over summer with a friend developed a 3D model where the students can test how changes in their model could also affect the affordability or the costing of the model. No idea if it works, but we will definitely test it. And then the following 2 weeks, the students take everything they learned in the first 7 weeks and do their design proposal, and then develop the project to the end. Next one. Yeah, so we have lectures accompanying our studio. And the last 3, I'm definitely gonna tape and share with the Superstudio if they're interested in, because there are interesting new hybrid structures. And what is really interesting, that all 3 projects, the architects are showing it, but they're all self-organized projects, which I think are extremely innovative in many ways, from environmental issues to material choices to the flexibility and the unit layouts. So I think that will be probably helpful for many studios as well. Next one, please. This is maybe just more for my students, what they gonna expect. So maybe we go for the next one. So I want to say a few more things, how I always saw myself as a housing activist, but recently changing to an architect activist. And I want to explain why. And I'm focusing more on the build. So the first project you see is my home in Chinatown. And that was 6 years of research and fighting for that we need to do small increments, Adrian, like what you're doing, inserting into a fabric. And the reason why this is so important, that you cannot accumulate a whole block and wipe out a whole community. But I learned that yes, we can have this ambition, but on the one way, there is the zoning, which was not working because the zoning preferred the big project. And that goes with, the zoning is a bit more small lift and can be changed with the political system. And there's also more people involved in it. Architects are involved, but there's many involved in creating the zoning. But then I also realized there's one more, which only our discipline is involved, and that is the building code. Our building codes are a disaster to do anything out of what we know, single house and tower. We have it even part 3 and part 9. Like there's nothing else. And I really now advocate to all architects, we have to tackle this. And so in this project, I used the scissor stair, and it's also 9-story high. So, but I learned I broke how many building code rules I had to break to do this building and how many zoning. The next one is a courtyard building, which equally I had to break building code rules and zoning rules. So even if we have these big ideas, we run against a really rigid system, which the building code we create as architects, right? And where we have to work on. And I feel like that's why I'm focusing more on building code, which is not really my interest to work with all this text and rules. But I think we have to, if we want to change the bigger picture, we really have to see where only we, because no one else is actually looking at this. And so the last picture, which is there, took me 10 years to build 13 units of infill, because it's in the single family neighborhood before we had to change the rule to the 6. So now I could do this, but back 10, and so it took 10 years to the city process to actually to 13 units of infill. And so now, of course, this kind of all the projects I do are forerunners to actually help the city to change rules. And I want to say one more thing, because my next project where I'm having a 6-story single stair project. And some of you all know Conrad Speckert in Toronto. I'm part of his team. We applied over 2 years ago for the building code change. And we now have a group across the country, I think 8 projects, which we have alternative solutions to do a prototype. So this is where I'm fighting right now. And it took me a year and a half to go to the city before I even got to the single stair issue, because I needed to change where the living rooms and where are. And that's kind of, I'm saying this because this is now my new passion, that we have to also look not only far out what we want to change, but very close in, where are the rules which have to change, or we're not going to get the rules and the building codes, and we have to change to actually get this new type of housing we want. Anyway, so that's kind of what I wanted to share with you. And I take my students on this journey, and we do basically infill projects with our replan group, exploring this. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That was incredible to see these different studios. Really appreciate it. We're a little over time. So what do you think, Sarah? Should we break right now, maybe?
Yeah, I think we should go straight to a break. It's been a long time of sitting still and listening to people talk. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back and we'll introduce the breakout rooms and what you're going to do in the breakout rooms. So get up, stretch your legs, get a glass of water, and we'll see you at, what is that going to be? 42 minutes after the hour.
See you soon.
See you soon.
So I just dropped into the chat a list of the 8 different breakout rooms that we have set for everyone. I've sorted everyone into a breakout room. I'm going to open those in a minute. We're going to spend 30 minutes in the breakout rooms. So I'm going to have them automatically close at the end of the 30 minutes. It's a mean way to do it, but it does seem effective when we have a big meeting like this. Each of the rooms is organized around the different studio presentations or course presentations that you just saw. And so in that room will be the faculty member who gave that presentation, if they're able to stay for the whole time, at least one faculty member who will facilitate the discussion, which might be the person leading as well, whose studio it is. It might be one of us who gets to float around to different rooms. And we've set up a presentation that gives pretty clear instructions on what we're asking you to do. But the idea is to first spend some time thinking about this concept of alienation and what it means, and then move from there into proposing either a revised or a new demand using the format of the AHA demands, the original 10 demands, to create something that really fits that studio and its purpose and its connection to this idea of alienation and the housing crisis that we have today. So the faculty all have the link to the presentation. Does anyone need me to reshare that link? I'm not going to put everyone onto the same Google slide deck because so the students shouldn't join this Google slide deck because I'm a little worried that it might collapse and crash. But there is a blank slide for each of the breakout rooms in that deck that you can fill in whatever new demand or revised demand that you co-create together in this time you have. You'll have 30 minutes. There's some time suggestions on those slides, so I think we'll be in good stead. And then when we come back together, we'll share the new proposals that you've each worked through in those rooms. Any questions before I hit open breakout rooms? Okay, here you go.
Do all the faculty have access? I mean, I know you've given them, but does anyone not have access who would like us to send you a quick link or anything, faculty-wise, to this Google slide deck? Because it'll be helpful when you're in the room to have that access. All right, we will assume. Oh, Mauricio, your hand is up.
Sorry,
Matthew,
that was a mistake. I meant to do this. I want to do thumbs up.
Okay. Awesome.
Great, we love thumbs up. Any
Matthew,
other questions?
can you send the link in the chat here?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, there it is. Grab it because that chat will disappear once you go into your room. Okay, breakout rooms are opening. Okay, I hope that went well for everyone.
Not enough time, Sarah.
I know, I knew that was gonna
We
happen.
just started.
Yeah. Well, we want to see what everyone came up with, and we also want to be sure to end on time. We've only got about 10 minutes left. So, Adrian, do you want to walk us through this last part?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we just want to look at
Yeah.
these slides and see. I mean, I also in our room, I definitely felt like we were just getting going.
Yeah.
But there was some interesting conversation, and hopefully, you've been able to put some of it down on the slide. And even if they're just rough notes, there's no refined answer to these questions. It'll be interesting to see where we're at. So I think we don't have much time. So I think we thought that this would be a good way to quickly get some ideas down. And maybe if breakout room 1 doesn't, well, maybe does breakout 1, is this?
This is Veronica.
Okay, great.
Okay. Oh, I think if maybe you refresh, I just typed something in literally right now. There we go.
Amazing.
So yes, we felt it went by quite quickly, but we had a really interesting conversation. So the studio theme was community-centric housing for rural and regional Canada, but what we started to discover in the conversation is that the community-centric component of this was really key to it. And actually the value systems that were coming out of community-centric thinking could apply itself to rural or urban conditions or any place in between. And so we started to talk a little bit about rooted connections to land and culture, holistic considerations about people's needs as well as political and economic. And so we ended up coming up with kind of a statement based on true sense of empathy and thinking about a true sense of empathy grounded in holistic value systems, one that considers social, economic, political, and environmental dimensions and is rooted in community engagement that responds to a wide range of needs. And so if we start to think of housing in this way, we start to turn the value system around.
We actually only have 1 minute each.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There's no description allowed, really. You just have to kind of explain the text.
All right.
On the
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Veronica.
Great. That's fantastic.
So, okay, that's the room I was in. So it's no longer clear how taxing gentrification works. So we just said we demand infill architecture and urbanism beyond codes, influenced by some UBC students and Inga's work. Infill as a means to create informality, diversity, affordability, and community, as a right to occupy space for community. Gentrification is tied to cleansing space, so the right to occupy resists this. If zoning is a practice of regulating and disciplining people, breaking zoning breaks discipline. Thanks.
Breakout room 3.
Can you guys just refresh it? I just added one, but I finished this off. Thank you.
You're making my life really hard. No, just joking, just joking.
All right. So the first one, our conversations were basically about number 1, we demand the preservation of vernacular architecture as integral to a better sense of home. And then a second one that I'm kicking around is this idea, we demand a local benefit index on building products to better understand how they relate to the landscape.
Great.
Amazing.
Okay, our studio is architecture and the right to housing. We had an amazing group of students. Thank you. So we demand that we need to center user experience. Residents should have a say in determining housing policies and decisions at different levels. Architects have a responsibility to listen to residents. Architectural education is accountable to the communities architects serve, and a human rights approach to design centers user experience. Thanks.
Amazing. Inga.
You're muted, Inga.
Sorry, I have to summarize it quickly because we just very quickly put all the things down, but we talked about that people should have agency in the making of their home. That was probably our big theme. And then this is just a list of things we have talked about. Community engagement, cultural relevance, sensitive to what is already there. We also talked about community owned in the broader spectrum, intentional communities, engaging personalization of space in shared living for a sense of home, self-organized architecture, architects and community clients in charge, less developer too expensive. So we haven't had time to polish it all together, but that's what we talked about.
That's great.
That's great. Fantastic. So Ben Gianni, he had to go out for another engagement, so wasn't in this room. So I will read it. It was a very spirited conversation. So We demand real places to live. And then in more detail, we demand a density of homes that are highly responsive to real people's diverse interests and desires around home to make a rich and vibrant community.
Wonderful. In breakout room number 7, we had a conversation around intentionality in design and intentional communities, and specifically how that could work in an urban environment, an urban context. And we also spoke about the things that already exist in urban context. So, the places that have a long history, many layers and many developments and changes over time, and how we're able to better make use of the past and be able to strengthen the connections between one another, perhaps if we build with greater intention. So we said as a group, we need to build intentional communities to strengthen urban environments and rebuild social connections.
Great.
Okay, we didn't really actually get time to formulating this, but I just put in what I could that I think kind of sums up most of the conversation. So land back, so extending land back beyond the kind of federal crown lands to also provincial and municipal levels, and thinking about how private landowners can consider ways of providing land access to Indigenous peoples locally. So, what comes into question there would be like parklands, conservation areas, like privately owned conservation areas, sanctuaries, etc.
Great.
That's it.
Fantastic. So I guess that's...
Whoa.
Whoa.
So this is in, yes, and can you refresh it? So this is in raw format. So just to be clear, we just asked everybody to type everything in the chat, and I basically copy pasted the whole thing. So it's still to be processed. Maybe there's a little bit of repetition, but the whole idea, some of the comments included this. We just demand a housing that nurtures, that provides stronger connections to nature as well as social life. We demand public input, understanding that we might not know all the answers now. We demand flexibility and connections, nurturing housing, livable dwelling, safe public space, personal spaces, and intentional design that refers to what was said before. And below are maybe, some more developed, let's say, answers. So for example, demand homes and environments that respect existing stories, but also are a place for new stories to be formed. Demand homes and environments that respect, sorry, I copied that twice. We demand housing that nurtures strong connections to nature and social life, that includes participatory design process and safe public spaces. We demand that living areas and common spaces are designed to be personalized by the residents and use them essentially as they see fit, to ensure that everybody is accepted. Resilient housing that responds with intelligence, but also sensitivity to climate change. Demand our environments are porous and give back to the land instead of suffocating the soil. So a lot of really, sensitive and beautiful comments. I love this one. We demand a home that supports our family, understanding that family, yes, it is our human family, but also more than that. So, yeah, very, very fruitful conversation. Thank you.
Fantastic. Good stuff.
Okay, thanks everyone. I just dropped in the chat. I realized that we're out of time. We don't want to keep anybody late, but we would love to hear, especially from the students, any feedback you have on how we could make these events better in the future, because we'll do another launch next semester when a new bunch of studios is starting. So feel free to click on that, and it's just a text box for you to enter any thoughts you have. Thanks everyone for participating. This was really fantastic. I hope that what we put together in those breakout rooms informs those studios going forward this term. We thought that this could be constructive and a way to learn. And then for the students, we hope you carry back what you heard today from all of the studios and from what you heard in the breakout rooms to the studio that you're participating in this term. Anything else we need to do to wrap up?
Well, we're so excited to see all the wonderful work that all the students create and the amazing ideas that they generate. So it's just like incredibly exciting. Thanks so much for everyone to come.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Have a great
you.
semester, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Let's stay in touch.
Thanks, folks. Enjoy the semester.
Bye.